My daughter-in-law sneered at my son as he entered the courtroom, but when the judge saw me walking behind him, he stopped and muttered in disbelief, "Why are you here?" The entire room fell silent while my daughter-in-law and her arrogant family looked at each other in a panic. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it travels. The noise in the courtroom died down instantly when Judge Marcus Henderson entered. He sat in the main seat, his piercing eyes scanning the room. When he looked at Malcolm, my son, I saw a flicker of compassion in his gaze, but then he froze, fixing his eyes on me. I felt the shock in that look, as if he were seeing a ghost from the past. I walked slowly toward the defense table, my knees aching from years of life's wear, but my heart steady as ever. I placed my old leather briefcase on the wooden surface. The sharp thud echoed like a declaration of war. I pulled out the chair and sat next to Malcolm, feeling my son's trembling hand under mine. The room was plunged into silence. The only sound was the scratching of the clerk's pen on paper. Judge Henderson leaned forward, his eyes wide, his usual sternness gone. His lips moved, and he said almost in a whisper, "Why did you come here?" That question was like a blast of cold wind sweeping through the room. Jasmine, my daughter-in-law, frowned, looking at me with suspicion. Her parents whispered to each other, their eyes full of distrust. Malcolm lifted his head, his gaze confused but holding a fragile spark of hope. Seeing him like that, my heart ached. He didn't know. No one in that room knew that I wasn't just a father. I had been someone else, someone that everyone in Atlanta once knew and called by name. Less than an hour before, the Atlanta sky was gray and heavy. I stood by the car, carefully helping Malcolm with each step. His steps were shaky, not just because of the wooden crutch bearing his weight, but also because of the cold stares of the crowd that fell upon us. The bells of the old Baptist church across the downtown square rang each mournful toll, hitting my chest like a reminder of the hard days we'd faced. I clutched the old leather briefcase in my hands, its worn edges reminding me of the years gone by. It didn't just hold papers. It held the honor of the future and the faint hope of my family. In front of the courthouse steps, a small crowd had gathered, some curious neighbors, some reporters with cameras ready. They murmured, buzzing like a restless swarm, "It's the Williams divorce," someone whispered. "They say it's ugly, real ugly." I heard it with a sinking heart, but I kept my face calm, showing no weakness. Then a luxury car pulled up sharply behind us. The door opened and Jasmine got out. She wore a red designer dress, the color of defiance, as if screaming to the world that she was the winner. Dark sunglasses covered half her face, but they couldn't hide the arrogant smile on her lips. Her parents and her brother followed, heads high, walking as if they already had victory in their hands. Seeing them made my stomach turn. They didn't know what Malcolm and I had been through. The sleepless nights, the days of struggle just to keep a roof over our heads. I motioned for Malcolm to walk ahead, and I followed him silently. My son, once a strong man, now leaned on crutches, his back hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. Every step he took was like a knife in my heart. I wanted to scream, to shield him from those pitying eyes, but all I could do was grip the briefcase tighter and walk with a forced calm. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick, the smell of old wood mixed with tension. Jasmine was already sitting on the defendant's bench, legs crossed, her bright red heels tapping the floor. Each tap, tap, tap like a taunt. When Malcolm struggled in, she smiled contemptuously and leaned toward her mother, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at him. He's nothing but a broken man now." I felt my blood boil, but I bit my lip to keep the rage from spilling over. Malcolm lowered his head, his chest heaving. He sat silently in the wooden chair for the plaintiff, his hands gripping his crutches as if they were his last support. Seeing my son like that tore me apart. He was the child I had sacrificed my whole life for, the one who had promised to build us a home no one could ever take away. And now he was here, humiliated by the same woman who once claimed to love him. Jasmine's lawyer, Denise Harper, stood up and placed a thick stack of papers on the table. Her sharp, confident voice echoed through the room. "We will demonstrate that my client's husband, Mr. Malcolm Williams, is no longer capable of fulfilling his duties as a husband and a father. Every word was like a hammer blow to my chest. I wanted to stand up and scream that they were lying, that Malcolm was still a man of dignity, still a father worth more than any of them, but I remained silent. I was waiting for my moment. The dense air of the courtroom took me back to days long past. Years ago, when the sun still bathed the red brick streets of our old neighborhood, my small family had known peace. Our house on the west side, though humble, was always filled with laughter. I remember those weekend afternoons when Malcolm was 7, running through the yard with a worn-out football in his hands, shouting plays, and pretending he was in the NFL. My wife Carolyn was still with us then, sitting on the porch, humming gospel tunes as she shelled peas, smiling as she watched her boys play. But that peace, I later discovered, was nothing more than a fleeting dream. One night, when the aroma of my wife's cornbread still lingered in the kitchen, she put down her fork, her gaze distant. "Leo," she said softly, "I can't do this no more." I looked at her, confused. "Can't do what, baby?" She sighed, not meeting my eyes. "This life. The bills, the pressure, the struggle. I met someone who can give me more." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there frozen, spoon in hand, as if my body had forgotten how to move. She didn't look back as she grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door. A silver car was waiting outside. In the glow of the streetlight, I saw the outline of a man in a suit. The door closed, and the car pulled away, taking my wife and half my world with it. Malcolm, who was only 10 then, stood by the window watching her go. The sound of that engine fading down the street became the sound of my heart breaking. That night, I found him curled under his blanket, shoulders trembling. I sat beside him, pulled him close, and whispered, "I don't know why she left, son, but I promise you, me and you, we're gonna stick together, no matter what." And I kept that promise. The following years were a relentless grind. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn, fix a small breakfast for Malcolm, and take him to school on my old bike, the tires half flat, the chain squealing with every turn. During the day, I worked at a shipping office down on Auburn Avenue, checking invoices and filing forms while pretending not to notice my boss's sighs whenever I yawned from lack of sleep. At night, while Malcolm did his homework, I'd sit at the kitchen table hunched over side jobs, bookkeeping for small businesses in the neighborhood, anything to make rent. There were nights when rain pounded the roof, so hard it drowned out the radio. Malcolm and I would walk home from the bus stop under a half-broken umbrella, our shoes soaked through, our hands clutching each other's for warmth. When we finally reached home, I'd smile through the exhaustion. "We're tougher than this storm, ain't we, boy?" And Malcolm, small but fierce, would grin back. "Yeah, Dad, we ain't gonna let it beat us." Those words kept me going. I never told him about the nights I sat up alone, counting the coins in my hand, deciding whether to buy his medicine or pay the electric bill. Once, when he came down with a bad fever, I had to run through the rain to the 24-hour pharmacy, only to realize I was short by $2. I remember the pitying look the cashier gave me as I counted nickels and dimes on the counter. I swallowed my pride and said softly, "Hold the change. I'll pay the rest tomorrow." I'd never felt poorer or prouder in my life, because when I brought that medicine home and saw Malcolm's little chest stop trembling, I knew I'd done what a father was supposed to do. Years rolled by like that, hard, but steady. Then, one morning, a letter came in the mail with the seal of Georgia Tech on it. I stood in the kitchen holding that envelope, my hands shaking. When Malcolm tore it open and read that he'd been accepted into their electrical engineering program, I felt my knees go weak. Tears fell from my eyes, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to shed since the night Carolyn left. But joy came hand in hand with fear. College was expensive, and we didn't have a dime to spare. That evening, I opened an old cigar box in my dresser. Inside lay my wedding ring, the last remnant of a life that once seemed golden. I held it for a long time, the metal cold against my palm. Then I put on my jacket and walked to the pawn shop down the block. The man behind the counter weighed it in his palm, then scribbled a number on a slip of paper. "Best I can do," he said. I nodded, trying to ignore the lump in my throat. When Malcolm found out, his eyes filled with tears. "Dad, You didn't have to do that. I'll get a job. I can. I cut him off, resting my hand on his shoulder. Son, you just focus on them books. Let me worry about the rest. I want you to have what I couldn't. He hugged me then, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't a boy anymore. Malcolm didn't let me down. Through years of study, he pushed himself beyond exhaustion, and when he graduated, he handed me the keys to a brand new 2-story house in Decatur, built with his own savings and labor. Dad, he said, his voice trembling, this is our home now. Nobody can ever take it away. I stood there staring at those walls, the paint still smelling fresh, the front porch gleaming in the afternoon sun. My chest swelled with pride, and tears blurred my vision. For once, the struggle had meant something. For once, we'd won. When Malcolm married Jasmine, I thought God had finally rewarded us with peace. Jasmine was radiant back then, all soft smiles and gentle hands. She'd help me in the kitchen, laughing as she stirred the collard greens, talking about the big family she and Malcolm would have. Daddy Leo, she'd say, grinning, I'm going to give you so many grandbabies you won't know what to do with them. And I believed her. I saw how Malcolm's eyes lit up when he looked at her. I thank God every night for sending that girl into his life. I thought the pain of the past was finally behind us, but happiness can vanish faster than smoke. It was late one summer night when I got the call, the kind of call that changes everything. The voice on the other end was trembling. Mr. Williams, there's been an accident at the construction site. Your son, you need to come to Grady Hospital right away. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I ran out the door without shoes, the pavement cold against my feet, the city lights blurring through my tears. When I got there, they led me into a sterile white room where Malcolm lay motionless, wrapped in bandages from his chest to his knees. Machines beeped softly beside him, each sound stabbing through my heart. Malcolm, I whispered, grabbing his hand. Daddy's here, son. You hang on, you hear me? I'm right here. He didn't answer, but his fingers twitched faintly around mine. That was enough. I stayed by his side the whole night, praying, begging, promising God anything if he'd just let my boy live. Months passed in a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and whispered prayers. Malcolm pulled through, but the doctor said his legs would never fully recover. He'd walk again, yes, but only with crutches, maybe for the rest of his life. The day he came home, our 2-story house felt like a different place. Once filled with laughter, it was now quiet as a tomb. I rearranged the living room, turning it into a downstairs bedroom so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. I set up a simple bed by the window, but every time I looked at it, my chest ached. That room was supposed to be the nursery, the one Jasmine and Malcolm had dreamed of filling with toys and tiny shoes. Now it was a refuge for a man fighting to stay whole. At first, Jasmine acted like the devoted wife. She brought him soup, helped with his medicine, smiled when I thanked her. I wanted to believe she still loved him, that the accident hadn't changed her heart. But soon, her patience started to run dry. One morning, as sunlight poured through the blinds, Malcolm said with a faint spark of hope, Dad, I'd like to go out to the garden today. Could you ask Jasmine to help me? I nodded and went to the kitchen, where she stood dressed up, her makeup perfect, scrolling through her phone. Jasmine, I said softly, Malcolm wants to sit in the garden a bit. Could you give him a hand? She turned slowly, frowning. Mr. Williams, I got errands to run. Can't he manage on his own for once? Without waiting for my answer, she slammed her coffee cup down and stormed out, heels clacking against the floor. I went back to Malcolm's room. He sat by the window, staring at nothing, his shoulders slumped. It's all right, Dad, he whispered. Forget it. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. Come on, son. Let's get you some fresh air. I pushed his wheelchair out to the garden myself. The azalea bushes were blooming, their petals bright against the gray sky. But inside me, everything felt heavy. I could feel it, the storm that was coming. Family dinners used to be the best time of day. The smell of baked chicken and cornbread filling the air, laughter bouncing off the walls. But now, each meal felt like a quiet battle. I tried to keep things warm, cooking Malcolm's favorite dishes, gumbo, red beans with rice, sometimes peach cobbler, when I had the strength. I wanted to bring back even a trace of joy. But Jasmine barely touched her food. She'd poke at her plate, take a few bites, then sigh and set her fork down. "Not hungry," she'd mutter, pushing the plate away. It wasn't the food. I knew that. It was him, my son. The same woman who once stood beside him through his graduation and smiled through tears at their wedding now couldn't even look him in the eye. Once, I asked softly, "Jasmine, are you feeling all right? You've barely eaten these days." She shrugged, her tone cold. "I'm fine, Mr. Williams. Just tired." But I could see the truth plain as day. Tired of Malcolm. Tired of pretending. At night, I'd hear her phone buzzing behind closed doors, her voice low and secretive. I'd catch bits and pieces, laughter, soft whispers, words that didn't belong to a faithful wife. One evening, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and froze at the sound of her voice. She was on the phone again, her tone sharp and calculating. "Don't worry," she whispered. "Once the house gets split, we'll have enough to start over. I'll make sure of it." I stood there in the dark, the glass trembling in my hand. The house my son had built with his blood and sweat, the house he promised would always be ours. I wanted to storm in, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to protect Malcolm from the truth until I could destroy her lies completely. Days passed, and Jasmine's transformation grew impossible to ignore. The simple dresses she used to wear were replaced by tight, glittering ones that screamed for attention. The sweet floral perfume she once wore was gone, replaced by a heavy, expensive scent that clung to every room she passed through. She started staying out late, saying she was meeting old friends or clearing her mind. I'd sit on the porch, watching her heels click across the driveway, wondering what lies she was walking toward. The neighbors started whispering. One afternoon at the farmer's market, Miss Thelma, the produce vendor I'd known for years, leaned over the counter and said quietly, "Mr. Williams, I hate to be the one to tell you, but I've seen your daughter-in-law a few times at that cafe on Auburn Street, with a man that sure ain't your son." Her voice was full of sympathy, but her words cut through me like glass. I nodded, thanked her, and walked away with shaking hands. That night, I sat on the porch, the sound of crickets buzzing in the dark, and I prayed for strength. Not for revenge, not yet, but for the courage to face what I already knew was coming. The breaking point came one stormy night. The rain beat against the windows, and the air smelled like thunder. I heard Malcolm groaning softly from his room, his voice weak. "Jasmine," he called out. "Can you help me? My leg's hurting bad." I stood in the hallway, waiting, hoping she'd show him even a small bit of kindness. Instead, her cold voice sliced through the air. "I'm not your nurse, Malcolm. If you need someone to take care of you, hire one." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to burst into that room, to tell her what kind of woman she'd become, but I couldn't. I just couldn't make things worse for Malcolm. When I peeked in, he was sitting there, staring at his hands, silent. The pain wasn't just in his legs, it was in his heart. The house that once echoed with laughter now sat under a blanket of silence. Some nights, I'd find myself sitting outside, watching the streetlights flicker, thinking of how things used to be. I remembered when Malcolm would sit on this very porch, holding Jasmine's hand, whispering promises of forever. Now, forever had turned to dust. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and the rain had finally stopped. I went to the kitchen for some water and passed by Jasmine's room. Her voice filtered through the door, cold and cruel. "Sarah," she said, my granddaughter small, trembling voice answering softly. "Tomorrow in court," Jasmine said. "When the judge asks, you have to tell him you don't want to live with your daddy. Say he's sick and can't take care of you. Say you want to stay with me. Understand?" There was a pause, then Sarah's voice broke. "But Mama, I don't want to lie. I love Daddy. I love Grandpa too." Jasmine's tone hardened, no mercy in it. "If you don't do what I say, you'll lose everything. You want to live broke. You want to end up like them. Do as I tell you." I felt something snap inside me. My hand was shaking on the doorknob. water spilling from the glass I was holding. My sweet Sarah, only 8 years old, was being forced to lie against her own father. That night, when I went back to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, covering my face with my hands. The tears I'd held back for months finally fell. I thought about all the nights I'd watched Malcolm lift Sarah into the air, her laughter filling the yard. "Grandpa, I'm going to be an astronaut one day," she'd shout, and he'd grin, saying, "You can be anything, baby girl. Daddy believes in you." Now that same child was being used as a weapon. I couldn't allow it. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky pink, I got up and made breakfast like always. Malcolm was still asleep, his face pale from sleepless nights. I peeked in on him quietly, then called Sarah out to the backyard. The air smelled of wet earth and oranges from the tree Malcolm had planted years ago. Sarah came out in her little blue dress, her eyes red and swollen. I sat beside her on the old wooden bench and said gently, "Baby girl, I heard what your mama told you last night." She froze, tears welling up again. "Grandpa, I don't want to lie. I just want to stay with Daddy." I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight, feeling her small shoulders shake. "You won't have to lie, sweetheart. Not ever. The truth is our strongest weapon, stronger than fear." She sniffled and looked up at me, her little voice trembling. "But Mama said if I tell the truth, she'll be mad. She said I won't get to see her no more." I wiped her tears, my heart aching but firm. Sometimes people who love us make bad choices, but telling the truth will never be wrong. "You hear me?" Sarah nodded slowly, her hand clutching mine. "Yes, Grandpa." At that moment, I made a silent vow, not just to my son, but to my granddaughter. I would protect them both, not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth and proof so strong that no one, not even Jasmine, could twist it. That night, after Sarah went to bed, I sat by the kitchen table under the weak yellow light, staring at my old briefcase. It had been years since I'd opened it. Inside were the remnants of another life, a lawyer's life, one I'd left behind long ago after losing everything that mattered. I thought I was done with that world, but now it was calling me back. I knew who I needed to see. An old friend from my days in the courtroom, a man who owed me a few favors. Robert Matthews, private investigator, the kind of man who could dig up truth where others saw only shadows. I hadn't stepped into Robert Matthews' office in nearly 20 years. The last time I did, it was to say goodbye to a career that had cost me everything. Back then, I was known as Leonard Williams, Esq., a defense attorney with a spotless reputation and a voice that could silence a courtroom. But after Carolyn left and Malcolm got sick, I gave it all up. The city had changed since then. What used to be a quiet stretch of Auburn Avenue was now lined with sleek coffee shops and neon signs. The world had moved on without me. But some things I hoped hadn't. Robert's office sat above an old pawn shop, the kind of place that smelled like cigars and dusty paper. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Behind a desk cluttered with files and cold coffee cups sat the same man I remembered. Round shoulders, gray beard, and eyes that had seen too much. When he looked up and saw me, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned. Leonard Williams, I thought you were dead or retired to some beach." I smiled faintly. Not dead yet, and retirement doesn't suit a man with unfinished business. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You always talked like a preacher before a storm. What brings you here, old friend?" I sat down, my briefcase resting on my knees. "I need your help, Robert. It's family this time. My son's wife, she's setting him up. Cheating, lying, and now she's trying to use their daughter in court to destroy him." He whistled low. "That's rough. You got proof?" "Not yet," I said, tapping the briefcase. "But I will. I need eyes on her, where she goes, who she meets, what she spends. I want everything." Robert nodded slowly, his expression turning serious. "You sure you want to dig into this? Sometimes the truth cuts deeper than the lie." I looked him straight in the eye. "Truth's all I got left, Robert." He sighed, reached into his desk drawer, and pulled out a small notepad. "All right, old man, give me the details." I told him everything: Jasmine's late-night phone calls, her strange absences, the way she was manipulating Sarah. When I finished, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I'll get my man on it," he said. "Couple of days. You'll have what you need." As I stood to leave, he added, "You still got that fire in you, Leo. I can see it. Be careful it doesn't burn you this time." I gave a tired smile. Fire's the only thing keeping me warm these days. The following week was one of the longest of my life. Each day, I tried to keep things as normal as possible at home. I cooked, I cleaned, I helped Malcolm with his therapy exercises, pretending not to notice the tension in the air whenever Jasmine walked in. But I was watching her now, every move, every word, every lie wrapped in a smile. One evening, I saw her toss her purse carelessly onto the counter, a receipt sticking out of the side. After she went upstairs, I picked it up. It was from the Marlowe Hotel, dated 2 nights ago. A single room, charged under her name. The total, $327.45. My hand shook. The same night she told Malcolm she was at a church retreat. I slipped the receipt into my briefcase. That night, Malcolm and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. He was quieter than usual, his gaze distant. "Dad," he said softly, "do you think Jasmine's unhappy?" The question hurt. I turned toward him, seeing the lines of pain on his face, the shadows under his eyes. "Why do you ask, son?" He sighed. "She's been different lately. Cold, distant. I keep thinking maybe it's my fault. Maybe I've become too much of a burden." I grabbed his shoulder firmly. "Don't you ever say that again. You hear me? You've carried this family more times than I can count. If she can't see that, that's on her, not you." His eyes glistened, and he nodded slowly. "I just don't want to lose Sarah." "You won't," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. 3 days later, Robert called. "Got something for you," he said. "You might want to sit down." I met him in a diner just outside downtown. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photos, grainy, black and white, but clear enough to tell the story. There was Jasmine, in the same red dress she wore to court that day, leaning across a restaurant table, holding another man's hand. Another shot showed her entering the Marlowe Hotel with him, his arm around her waist. My stomach turned. Robert exhaled slowly. "Guy's name is Marcus Benton. Works at an accounting firm. Married, 2 kids. Been seeing your daughter-in-law for over 6 months. My man's been tailing them for a week. Same pattern every time." I stared at the pictures, each one like a hammer to the chest. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "Keep watching. I need more. Something solid enough for court. Dates, times, transactions. Leave nothing to chance." Robert nodded. "You got it." As I left the diner, the wind was cold and sharp, biting at my skin. The sky over Atlanta was bruised gray, the kind that warned of a coming storm. When I got home, Jasmine was sitting on the couch watching TV, her legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. She glanced at me and smiled sweetly. "Evening, Mr. Williams. You look tired. Everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Just errands." "Uh-huh," she said, turning back to the screen. "You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Big day. She meant the custody hearing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos spread before me. Each image felt like a piece of a puzzle falling into place. I remembered her words to Sarah. "Say you don't want to live with your daddy." Not anymore. I opened my briefcase and started preparing. Years of experience came flooding back. The rhythm of cross-examinations, the logic of evidence, the scent of ink and legal paper. By sunrise, I had organized every document, every receipt, every photo, each piece labeled, dated, ready. When the morning light filtered through the blinds, I went to Malcolm's room. He was awake, looking at me with weary eyes. "You all right, Dad?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I'm fine, son. Just got some things to take care of." He frowned. "You're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" I smiled gently. Crazy? Maybe. Necessary? Definitely. That afternoon, I met with Robert one last time before court. He handed me a flash drive and said, "Everything's on there, timestamps, recordings, even credit card statements linking her to the hotel stays. You could bury her with this. I closed my hand around it, the weight of justice, or vengeance, resting in my palm. Thank you, Robert, I said quietly. He studied me for a moment. You really going to walk back into that courtroom after all these years? I looked him in the eye. I never left it. I just stopped fighting the wrong battles. When I got home, the house was empty. Jasmine was gone again, probably shopping. I went into my room and pulled out my old suit, the one I hadn't worn since my last case. The fabric was worn but clean. As I buttoned the shirt, I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me had gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a fire that had dimmed but never died. Tomorrow, the truth would walk into that courtroom, not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet, undeniable power. And for the first time in years, I felt alive again. The morning of the hearing came heavy with rain. Atlanta's skies wept gray, the kind that makes the city look like it's holding its breath. I sat by the window in my old suit, watching water slide down the glass like slow tears. On the table before me sat my briefcase, open, neatly organized, every paper in place. I'd reviewed it a dozen times through the night, not because I doubted my preparation, but because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving anything to chance. In that case lay the story of betrayal and proof strong enough to break lies apart. But it also held my son's last hope. Malcolm came into the room slowly, his crutch tapping against the wooden floor. He looked at me with tired eyes. "You're up early," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep." He managed a small smile. Neither could I. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of the rain our only companion. Then he asked, "You really think the judge will listen? That he'll believe us over her?" I turned toward him. "I don't need him to believe us, son. I just need him to see the truth." He nodded, but the fear in his eyes lingered. I reached out and rested my hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens today, you hold your head high. Don't let her or anyone else make you feel small." His lip trembled, but he nodded again. "I won't, Dad." When Sarah came downstairs, her little blue dress freshly ironed, I felt my chest tighten. She looked so grown, so brave, holding that small stuffed bear she refused to leave behind. "You ready, baby girl?" I asked. She looked up at me and whispered, "Will they make me talk today?" "Maybe," I said gently. "But if they do, you just tell the truth. That's all you ever need to say." She nodded, gripping my hand tightly. The courthouse loomed tall and cold against the gray sky. Rain dripped from its stone steps, glistening like glass. I helped Malcolm out of the car while the cameras clicked from a distance. The gossip had spread. Everyone wanted to see the Williams divorce. I ignored them. I'd faced worse crowds in my time. Inside, the hallway was lined with polished wood and the faint smell of old paper. My shoes squeaked against the marble floor as we made our way to courtroom 3B. Jasmine and her lawyer were already there, sitting at the front. She looked radiant, dressed in a cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly done, her smile soft and polished. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was the victim. When her eyes met mine, the smile faltered for just a second. She wasn't expecting me to be there. Not like this. Her lawyer, Denise Harper, turned and frowned slightly, whispering something in Jasmine's ear. Then Denise straightened and walked toward me. "Mr. Williams," she said curtly, "you're not on the docket as counsel. Are you here as a witness?" I smiled faintly. "No, ma'am. I'm here as counsel for the plaintiff, my son." Her brows shot up. "You're not licensed to practice anymore, are you?" I opened my briefcase and slid a document toward her. A freshly stamped letter from the State Bar of Georgia, reinstated as of yesterday morning. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "See you in there," I said quietly, and walked past her. The courtroom was already buzzing when Judge Marcus Henderson entered. He was a tall man with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, and for recognizing faces. When he saw me sitting beside Malcolm, his expression shifted, surprise flickering across it. For a moment, his composure slipped. "Mr. Williams, it's been a long time." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing. "Too long." He nodded slowly. then turned his attention to the case file. All right, let's proceed. The clerk called the case. Williams versus Williams, custody and division of assets. Denise Harper rose first, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the bench. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Jasmine Williams, seeks full custody of her daughter on the grounds that Mr. Williams is physically incapable of providing stable care and has displayed emotional volatility since his accident. Her words hung in the air like poison. She continued, flipping through her papers. We will also show that the marital home was primarily funded by Mrs. Williams' contributions, and therefore, she is entitled to full ownership. I felt Malcolm tense beside me, his knuckles white. Then Denise added, almost casually, lastly, we will call the minor child, Sarah Williams, to testify on her preference regarding custody. My stomach turned. I glanced at Sarah, sitting quietly with her small hands folded in her lap. She looked at me with fear in her eyes, and I gave her a small nod, just enough to remind her, truth, not fear. When Denise finished, the judge looked at me. Mr. Williams, your response? I rose slowly, every joint in my body creaking like old wood. Your Honor, with your permission, I'll present my opening after the cross-examination of Mrs. Williams. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Granted. Denise looked slightly thrown, but motioned for Jasmine to take the stand. Jasmine walked up confidently, every step deliberate. She placed her hand on the Bible, took the oath, and sat down. Mrs. Williams, Denise began, could you tell the court about your husband's condition since his accident? Jasmine sighed dramatically. It's been very difficult. Malcolm's not the man I married. He's become angry, unpredictable. Sometimes he yells for no reason. I've done my best to care for him, but it's not easy raising a child in that environment. Lies, every word, wrapped in a voice so sweet you could almost believe it. Denise nodded sympathetically. And how have you managed financially since his injury? Jasmine folded her hands. I've been the one handling the bills, the groceries, everything. I even had to pick up part-time work just to keep the house afloat. I nearly laughed. The house she claimed was built with her money, the one I'd seen her try to sell behind his back. When Denise finished, she turned to me. Your witness, Mr. Williams. I stood, buttoning my coat. The air in the courtroom changed. Even the judge leaned slightly forward. Mrs. Williams, I began, my voice calm but sharp. You say you've been struggling to make ends meet. Yet, according to your credit card statements, you've recently spent several nights at the Marlowe Hotel. Can you explain why? Her eyes widened. That's not true. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the receipt, sliding it across the table. This is from the Marlowe Hotel, dated July 18th, room 304. Paid with your card. Care to explain? Denise jumped in. Objection relevance. The judge raised a brow. Overruled. Continue. Jasmine swallowed hard. It was a work retreat. I nodded slowly. A work retreat. And the man seen entering the hotel with you, Marcus Benton, was that part of the retreat too? Her lips parted, her face pale. Because, I continued, sliding another photo forward. This image was taken at 9:42 p.m. that same night. You're holding hands with him in the lobby. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Your Honor, Denise protested. This is harassment. Sit down, counselor. Judge Henderson said sharply. Let him finish. I looked Jasmine dead in the eyes. You told this court my son was unstable. But the truth is, you've been unfaithful for months. You're lying to the court, and worse, you're manipulating your daughter into lying for you. Jasmine's voice cracked. That's not. I reached into the briefcase one last time and held up a recording device. This was recorded last Thursday night. Your voice, instructing Sarah to say she doesn't want to live with her father. Jasmine froze. The judge leaned forward. Is this true, Mrs. Williams? The silence that followed was suffocating. Jasmine's lower lip trembled. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Finally, Judge Henderson turned to her lawyer. Counselor, I think we've heard enough for today. He looked at me then, his eyes softening slightly. Mr. Williams, it seems you haven't lost your touch. I bowed my head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. As Jasmine was led from the stand, she refused to look at me. Her perfect mask had finally cracked, and behind it was nothing but fear. Malcolm reached over, gripping my hand. His eyes were filled with tears. Dad, how did you? I smiled faintly. Let's just say, old habits die hard. The courtroom emptied slowly that afternoon, but the air stayed thick with whispers. You could feel it, the kind of silence that follows a storm too loud to forget. Reporters lingered by the door, murmuring, "That's Leonard Williams, the old defense lawyer. He just tore that woman apart in there." Cameras clicked like insects in corners, and I ignored them, focusing only on Malcolm and Sarah. Malcolm sat beside me, his crutch leaning against the bench, his face pale, but his eyes alive again, clearer than they'd been in months. Sarah clung to his side, her little hands gripping his sleeve like she was afraid he might disappear. Judge Henderson tapped his gavel gently and said, "We'll resume in 2 days. The court will review the recording and other evidence before rendering judgment." I nodded and stood, offering my arm to my son. "Come on, son. We're done here for now." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky above Atlanta was still gray, but light pushed through the clouds like a promise trying to break free. The courthouse steps glistened under that pale light, wet but clean, like a stage after the final act. Reporters swarmed around us the moment we stepped out. "Mr. Williams, are you really returning to law? Do you have any comment on your daughter-in-law's affair? Sir, is it true you were once called the voice of justice?" I kept walking. "No comment," I said quietly, but the flash of cameras followed us like ghosts. By the time we reached the car, Malcolm's hand was shaking. I opened the door for him and waited until Sarah climbed in. Then, before I got behind the wheel, I looked back at that courthouse, its tall white pillars, its heavy silence, and I whispered to myself, "This isn't over." Not yet. That evening, the house felt different, lighter somehow, but I knew it was the calm before another storm. Jasmine hadn't come home since court. Her clothes, her makeup, even her perfume, they lingered like a stain on the air, but she was gone. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. Malcolm sat on the porch, staring into the distance. The orange tree in the yard swayed gently, its leaves shining in the fading sun. I joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in my hands. He took his quietly, his gaze fixed on nothing. "You embarrassed her real bad today," he said softly. I took a slow sip. "I didn't embarrass her, son. I just let the truth speak." He sighed. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I said. "It's the hardest thing in the world, to fight someone you once called family. But it's harder to stay silent when you know the truth." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his voice cracked. "I loved her, Dad. I still can't believe she did all that, using Sarah like that." I reached over, resting my hand on his shoulder. "Love doesn't make her innocent, son. It just means you've got a good heart. Don't lose that." He nodded, his eyes shining with tears he didn't let fall. Sarah came running out a few minutes later, barefoot, holding a small drawing she'd made. "Daddy, Grandpa, look," she said proudly. She'd drawn the 3 of us, me, Malcolm, and her, standing under the orange tree, smiling. Above us, she'd written in big uneven letters, "My family." Malcolm's voice broke. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." I smiled, blinking away the sting in my eyes. "You're quite the artist, baby girl." In that moment, I realized something. All the papers, the arguments, the courtrooms, none of it mattered as much as this. Protecting her joy, her innocence. That was the real fight. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man in a gray suit, tall, sharp-eyed, the kind who didn't waste words. "Mr. Williams?" he asked. "That's me." He handed me a sealed envelope. "From Harper & Associates, representing Mrs. Jasmine Williams." I took it slowly, thanked him, and closed the door. Malcolm watched from the living room, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" he asked. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notice. Jasmine had filed a motion accusing me of tampering with evidence and coaching a minor witness. Malcolm's face went pale. "She's trying to get you disqualified." I nodded slowly, scanning the document. "She's desperate. When liars start drowning, they grab at anything they can reach. But can she do it? He asked. Not unless the judge has lost his mind. I said, we've got the truth on our side. Still, I felt a small chill run through me. I'd seen this tactic before, cornered people lashing out, hoping to muddy the waters. Jasmine had a snake's instinct for survival. 2 days later, we were back in court. The air was heavier this time. Word had spread about the scandal, the photos, the recording, the affair. Reporters filled the back rows, pens ready. Jasmine entered with a lawyer, wearing all black like she was going to a funeral. Her eyes were red but dry, her chin high. For a brief second, she looked at me, not with anger, but with something colder. Calculation. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Please be seated, he said. The clerk read Jasmine's motion aloud, and Denise Harper rose to speak. Your Honor, we believe the evidence introduced by Mr. Williams was obtained unlawfully. Furthermore, we have reason to believe he influenced the minor child's testimony through manipulation. The courtroom murmured. Judge Henderson looked over his glasses at me. Mr. Williams, your response? I stood calm but firm. Your Honor, the evidence was gathered through a licensed private investigator, Mr. Robert Matthews, operating under Georgia law. The recording was made inside the family home, where my client, Mr. Malcolm Williams, is the legal homeowner. As for the child, she was told one thing, to tell the truth. Denise crossed her arms. Convenient. I met her gaze without flinching. The truth usually is. Judge Henderson's expression didn't change, but his tone softened slightly. Unless counsel can present proof of misconduct, the motion is denied. Denise hesitated, then sat down. Jasmine clenched her fists under the table. I exhaled quietly. One battle down. But I knew this war wasn't over. That night, after the hearing, I stopped by Robert's office again. He was sitting in the same worn chair, his tie loosened, his face buried in files. Leonard, he said, glancing up. I saw the hearing on the news. You really rattled that woman. She's not done yet, I said. She's got something planned. I can feel it. He leaned back, lighting a cigarette. I'll keep an eye on her. But between you and me, she's cornered. Folks like her, when they're out of tricks, they start to crumble. I nodded, though a part of me didn't believe it. Jasmine wasn't the type to crumble quietly. Before I left, Robert handed me another envelope. Found something else. Might come in handy for the final hearing. What is it? He gave a thin smile. You'll want to open it when the time's right. Back home, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the envelope in my hands. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths need to wait for their moment. The kind of moment that turns a battle into victory. I looked toward the living room, where Malcolm and Sarah were laughing together, the sound soft and real. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. But deep inside I knew the real test was still coming. And when it did, I'd have to stand taller, speak louder, and fight harder than ever before. Because justice wasn't just about winning. It was about protecting the light that people like Jasmine tried to destroy. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Not again. The day before the final hearing, the sky over Atlanta was the color of ash. You could feel a storm building, not just in the air, but in my chest. I sat by the window in my small office, the old briefcase open in front of me, reviewing every document for the 100th time. Every line, every photo, every timestamp had to be perfect. I'd built my reputation on precision once, and today, I needed that part of myself again. Malcolm walked in quietly, leaning on his crutch. His face looked pale, his eyes heavy from sleepless nights. You're still up? He asked softly. Couldn't sleep, I said, not looking up. He leaned against the doorframe. Dad, what if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Jasmine finds a way to twist everything? I finally looked at him. You've seen what she's capable of, son. Lies always find a way to dress up pretty. But when truth walks in, even lies can't stand up straight. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were clouded with worry. You sound like you're going to war tomorrow. I closed the briefcase, locking it with a sharp click. That's because I am. The next morning, the courthouse was buzzing long before the hearing started. The story had spread across the city. The old lawyer who'd come out of retirement to defend his son, the scandal of betrayal and corruption, the recording that shocked the courtroom. People filled every bench. Reporters whispered, pens ready. Cameras waited like vultures at the door. When we arrived, Malcolm walked slowly beside me, Sarah holding my hand tightly. I could feel her tiny fingers trembling, but her chin was up. She was braver than most adults I'd known. Jasmine entered minutes later, flanked by her parents and her lawyer. She wore a dark green dress this time, elegant, deliberate. Her face was calm, too calm, the kind that hides panic behind poise. When her eyes met mine, she didn't blink. The tension in that room could have cracked glass. Then Judge Henderson entered. The murmurs died instantly. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the crowd. This is the continuation of Williams versus Williams. I expect order and respect in this courtroom. He nodded toward me. Mr. Williams, you may proceed with your closing argument. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 70 years in my bones, but also the strength of every battle I'd ever fought. I opened my briefcase, my fingers brushing over the envelope Robert had given me, the one I hadn't opened yet. I took a deep breath and began. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but resonant. This case isn't just about property or money. It's about truth, about a man who gave everything for his family and a woman who decided that love was a burden she didn't want to carry. I walked to the center of the courtroom, every eye following. My son, Malcolm Williams, built his life with his bare hands. He worked double shifts, risked his health, and nearly lost his life building the house that's now being contested. A house that was never hers to claim, because the records, the receipts, and the deeds prove it was his long before the marriage. I handed the certified documents to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Henderson glanced at them and nodded slowly. But even beyond property, this case has shown us something darker: deceit, lies whispered into the ears of a child, manipulation used as a weapon. I paused and glanced at Jasmine. Her eyes flickered, but she kept her chin high. Mrs. Williams has not only betrayed her vows, she's tried to poison the bond between a father and his daughter. And if there's one thing this court should protect above all else, it's the innocence of a child. The courtroom was silent. Only the sound of pens scratching could be heard. Then I reached into my briefcase again. My hand brushed the sealed envelope Robert had given me. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small flash drive. Your Honor, I said, walking forward. I have one final piece of evidence, provided by a licensed investigator. It details recent financial transactions made between Mrs. Williams and a man named Marcus Benton. The bailiff took the flash drive and handed it to the clerk. Moments later, the monitor behind the judge lit up, showing a series of statements and images. Hotel receipts, transfers, jewelry purchases, even an email exchange between Jasmine and Marcus. The subject line read, "When this is over, the house is ours." Gasps filled the courtroom. Jasmine's face turned white. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering frantically, but she pushed her away. Judge Henderson's voice cut through the noise. Mrs. Williams, would you care to explain these transactions? Her mouth opened, then closed. Those aren't real. He's framing me. I stepped forward, my tone sharp as steel. That's your email address, Mrs. Williams. The same one registered to your online banking. These transfers came from your personal account, not his. You can lie to me, but you can't lie to the bank. Her composure cracked. He said he'd help me. Marcus said we'd be secure after the divorce. I didn't mean. She stopped herself too late. The judge raised his hand. Enough. The record will reflect that statement. I took a slow step back, letting the silence settle like dust after a battle. Your Honor, I said quietly. The truth doesn't need a shout. It just needs a chance to be heard. Judge Henderson nodded slowly. You've made your point, Mr. Williams. I turned toward Malcolm and Sarah. My son's eyes were wet, his face trembling with relief. Sarah clutched his sleeve tightly, her small smile breaking through the tension. Then I looked at Jasmine. She wasn't angry anymore, just hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like regret, or maybe just fear. The hearing ended in a daze of whispers. The judge announced he would issue the final verdict the next day. We stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, the storm clouds finally gone. Reporters rushed toward us, shouting questions. "Mr. Williams, how does it feel to be back in the courtroom? Is it true the Queen of Law was your mentor years ago? What do you think the verdict will be?" I ignored them, shielding Sarah as we made our way to the car. Malcolm leaned against his crutch, his voice soft. "Dad, I don't know what to say." I smiled faintly. "You don't have to. You already said enough just by standing there." He nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time, peace. That night, the house was quiet. The rain had stopped completely, and the smell of fresh earth drifted through the open window. I sat on the porch with my coffee, the crickets humming in the distance. Sarah came outside in her pajamas, holding her stuffed bear. "Grandpa, can I sit with you?" "Of course, sweetheart." She climbed onto my lap, her head resting against my chest. After a while, she whispered, "Is it over now?" "Almost," I said softly. "Tomorrow, the judge will tell us what happens next." "Will we get to stay here?" I looked up at the orange tree swaying in the moonlight. "Yes, baby girl. This is your home. No one's going to take it from you." She smiled sleepily, her eyes closing as I rocked her gently. Inside, Malcolm was already asleep on the couch. The weight on his face was lighter, the first hint of peace returning. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the night wash over me. Tomorrow would bring the final word, but deep down, I already knew how it would end. Because sometimes, when you fight long enough, truth doesn't just win, it redeems. The next morning came bright and cold, the kind of morning that makes the world feel sharp and new. The storm had passed, and the air carried that rare quiet that comes after a long fight, a quiet that felt almost sacred. I woke early. The house was still, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains, painting gold lines across the living room floor. Malcolm was already awake, sitting in his wheelchair, dressed in a clean white shirt and navy suit. "You're early," I said, tying my tie. He smiled faintly. "Didn't really sleep. I keep thinking this is it, huh?" I nodded. "This is it." From the kitchen, I could hear Sarah humming softly, packing her little backpack. She was carrying her stuffed bear again, the same one she'd clutched during every hard night. Seeing her reminded me what all of this had been for. "Dad," Malcolm said after a pause, "I just want to thank you for everything. If it weren't for you..." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't thank me, son. Thank yourself. You're the reason I fought. You and that little girl." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, his eyes glassy. The courthouse was packed when we arrived. The story had spread through every neighborhood, from the high rises of Buckhead to the narrow streets of Old Fourth Ward. People lined the halls, waiting to hear the outcome of the Williams versus Williams case. Cameras flashed as we entered. Some folks smiled, nodding respectfully. Others whispered my name like it was a legend pulled out of retirement. But I didn't care about the noise. My focus was on my son, my granddaughter, and the truth we had laid bare. When we stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick, anticipation hanging like fog. Jasmine sat on the defendant's bench, her face pale and drawn. Gone was the confident smirk she'd worn on the first day. She looked smaller now, diminished, like a shadow of her former self. Her lawyer, Denise Harper, sat stiffly beside her, flipping through papers that wouldn't save them. I could see it in her eyes, resignation. She knew this was over. Judge Henderson entered, and the room fell silent. Even the shuffling of papers stopped. He sat tall in his chair, the morning light catching the edge of his glasses. He cleared his throat. After reviewing the testimony, evidence, and statements from both parties, this court is ready to deliver its verdict. You could hear hearts beating. "Mrs. Jasmine Williams," he began, his voice calm but heavy. "You have been found to have engaged in an extramarital affair during your marriage to Mr. Malcolm Williams. Furthermore, it has been proven that you attempted to manipulate your minor child's testimony in order to influence these proceedings." Jasmine closed her eyes. Her mother reached forward from the audience, But she didn't move. The judge continued, "These actions have demonstrated a disregard for truth, for the sanctity of family, and for this court's integrity." He shifted his gaze to my son. "Mr. Malcolm Williams, despite your physical condition, the court recognizes your continued efforts to provide care, stability, and love for your daughter. There's no evidence of neglect or incompetence." My chest tightened. "Therefore," Judge Henderson said, his voice ringing through the courtroom, "the full custody of the minor, Sarah Williams, will be awarded to her father, Mr. Malcolm Williams, and her grandfather, Mr. Leonard Williams, as legal guardian." There was a collective gasp. The marital home located in the West End district, purchased before the marriage, is hereby confirmed as the sole property of Mr. Malcolm Williams. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked toward Jasmine. "As for Mrs. Williams, you will receive no financial compensation from this divorce. You may apply for supervised visitation rights pending a psychological evaluation." Silence. Then, a wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom like a rising tide. Malcolm covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking, this time not from pain, but from relief. Sarah, sitting beside me, squealed softly, hugging her stuffed bear. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but didn't fight them. Jasmine stood abruptly. "That's not fair," she cried, her voice breaking. "You can't do this to me." Judge Henderson raised a hand. "Mrs. Williams, sit down. The decision is final." But she didn't. She turned toward me, her eyes blazing through tears. "You destroyed my life," she shouted. "You old man, you had no right." I rose slowly, meeting her gaze. "No, Jasmine, you destroyed your own life when you tried to destroy theirs." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jasmine's father pulled her by the arm, but she resisted for a moment, then slumped, her defiance finally gone. Denise Harper gathered her papers quietly, her face expressionless. She knew they'd lost, not just a case, but their dignity. When the gavel came down for the last time, it sounded like thunder. The judge stood, offering a faint nod in my direction. "Mr. Williams," he said, "justice has been served." "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied softly. Reporters tried to swarm us again as we exited, shouting questions. "Mr. Williams, how does it feel to win? Will you practice law again? What message do you have for families going through something similar?" I paused for a second and said, "Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. You just have to stand tall enough to let it speak." Then I guided Malcolm and Sarah down the courthouse steps into the bright morning sun. Back home, the house felt like it could finally breathe again. The air was lighter. The shadows seemed softer. Malcolm rolled through the doorway, his face glowing with a kind of peace I hadn't seen in years. Sarah ran to the kitchen, laughing, her small feet pattering on the floor. "Grandpa," she called, "can we have pancakes? The special kind." I chuckled. "The special kind? That means extra syrup, huh?" She giggled, her joy filling every corner of the house that had once been silent and cold. I looked over at Malcolm, who was staring around the living room, his eyes wet. "You know," he said softly, "for a while, I thought I'd never feel at home again." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Home isn't just a place, son. It's what you build when you refuse to give up." He nodded, his voice trembling. "I'll never forget what you did for me, Dad." I smiled faintly. "You'd have done the same for me." That evening, the neighborhood gathered outside. Some of our longtime neighbors, Miss Thelma, old Mr. Harris from next door, a few friends who had heard the story, came by just to shake my hand or hug Malcolm. "You showed them, Leonard," Miss Thelma said proudly. "You showed the whole city what truth looks like when it stands up straight." I chuckled softly. All I did was remind folks that justice still breathes, even if it takes a while to wake up. As the sun set, the golden light bathed the porch. Sarah played under the orange tree, her laughter echoing through the yard. I sat down in my old chair, my coffee steaming, and closed my eyes for a moment. The war was over. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a stranger. But even in peace, memories linger. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. Somewhere, out there in the shadows of the city, Jasmine was starting over, maybe in a small apartment, maybe alone, maybe still blaming me. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. Pity maybe. Sadness for what she could have been. For the love she threw away. But mostly, I felt gratitude for my son's strength, for Sarah's innocence, for the chance to fight one last battle and win it not for pride, but for love. The clock ticked quietly in the background. The orange tree outside swayed gently in the moonlight, its branches heavy with fruit. I smiled. Justice had spoken, and this time, it spoke in our favor. 2 weeks had passed since the verdict, but sometimes I still woke up thinking I was back in that courtroom, the sound of the gavel echoing in my dreams. It takes time for peace to stop feeling like silence before another fight. But this time it was different. The house, once heavy with tension, was alive again. The morning started with laughter, Sarah chasing her cat down the hallway, Malcolm trying to keep his coffee steady as she ran past. I'd stand by the stove, flipping pancakes, the smell of butter and sugar filling the air. "You're getting syrup on my papers again, young lady," Malcolm would tease, and Sarah would grin, sticking her tongue out. "Then you better eat faster, Daddy." Those small moments, the ones we used to take for granted, now felt sacred. I spent most mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. The air smelled of jasmine and cut grass. Down the street, kids biked to school, dogs barked, and life carried on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But people still stopped by sometimes, neighbors, old clients, even strangers, just to shake my hand or drop off a thank you card. They'd say things like, "Mr. Williams, you gave us hope," or, "That courtroom story made us believe justice still works." I never knew what to say to that. I wasn't a hero. I was just an old man protecting what was left of his family. Malcolm, on the other hand, was healing in ways I hadn't expected. His physical therapy was going well. He still walked with a crutch, but he was stronger now. His face had color again. His laugh had life again. One evening, I found him sitting in the garage, surrounded by wires and blueprints. "What are you building, son?" I asked. He smiled sheepishly. "Something for Sarah. A little robot that waters the garden." I chuckled. "You're turning my backyard into a science fair, huh?" He grinned. "I figured it's time to build something new, something that grows." That hit me harder than he realized. After years of watching him break under the weight of loss, seeing him create again felt like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. Jasmine hadn't tried to contact us. Not once. The judge had ruled she could apply for supervised visitation after completing counseling, but so far, she hadn't filed anything. Maybe pride kept her away. Maybe guilt. One evening, as the sunset burned orange across the yard, I found Sarah sitting under the orange tree, staring at the sky. "You thinking about your mama?" I asked gently. She nodded, not looking at me. "Do you think she misses me?" I hesitated. "I think she misses what she lost. And that includes you." She was quiet for a while, then whispered, "I wish she'd just say sorry." I knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her face. Sometimes, people carry so much shame they forget how to speak. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it too. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "Grandpa, when you tell people the truth, does it always hurt?" I smiled sadly. "Sometimes. But the truth hurts less than lies, sweetheart. Lies rot inside you. Truth heals, even when it stings first." She thought about that for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Then I'm going to tell the truth always." I hugged her tightly. "That's my girl." One Sunday afternoon, an old name reappeared in my life, Robert Matthews. He pulled up in his rusted blue Chevy, stepping out with his usual grin. "You thought you could win that case and just forget about me, huh?" I laughed, shaking his hand. "I figured you'd show up sooner or later." He leaned against the porch rail, lighting a cigarette. "Word around town is they're calling you the Lion of Atlanta now. Not bad for an old man." I shook my head, chuckling. That name belongs to a younger fool who didn't know when to quit. Robert took a drag, blowing smoke into the humid air. "You still got it, Leo. That cross-examination you pulled? Damn near textbook. I smiled faintly. I wasn't trying to prove I still had it. I was just trying to save my son. He nodded, serious now. That's what made it powerful. You fought from love, not ego. That's rare these days. He reached into his jacket and handed me a manila envelope. These are copies of the case materials. Keep them. You might want them if you ever go back to practicing. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Not just paper, but memories. The courtroom, the tension, the fear, the fire. I think I'm done fighting, Robert, I said quietly. At least in court. He smiled knowingly. Yeah, maybe. But people like us, we don't stop fighting. We just pick different battles. We stood there for a while, saying nothing. Just two old men who'd seen too much of the world to believe peace comes easy. Before he left, he turned back and said, "If you ever do come back, Atlanta could use more lions." That night, after dinner, I pulled out one of my old law books. The spine was cracked, the pages yellowed. I flipped through it slowly, running my fingers over the handwritten notes in the margins, reminders of who I used to be. I thought of all the clients I defended, all the arguments I'd crafted, all the times I'd let ambition pull me away from the people who mattered most. And then I thought of the courtroom 2 weeks ago, of Malcolm's face when the verdict was read, of Sarah's laughter in the hallway afterward. For the first time, I understood something. I hadn't gone back to being a lawyer. I'd just gone back to being a father who remembered what justice really meant. Not words in a book, not laws on a page, but love, the kind that refuses to stay silent when the world turns cruel. A few days later, Malcolm came to me with an envelope in his hand. "Dad," he said, "you got mail from the state bar." I frowned. Probably just paperwork from reinstatement. But when I opened it, there was a letter, an invitation. "Mr. Leonard Williams, the Georgia Bar Association would like to invite you to speak at this year's conference on the topic of integrity in law. Your recent case has inspired many within our community." I stared at the letter for a long time, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Malcolm grinned. "You should go. You've earned it." I shook my head, smiling softly. "I think my time behind that podium's over." Sarah popped her head around the corner. "Does that mean you're famous now, Grandpa?" I laughed, setting the letter aside. "No, sweetheart. It just means some people finally remembered my name." That night, I sat out on the porch again, the air warm and thick with the smell of honeysuckle. The stars blinked faintly above the city skyline. I could hear Malcolm reading a bedtime story to Sarah through the open window. His voice was steady, calm, peaceful. I closed my eyes, listening. Somewhere in that sound, in the soft murmur of a father reading to his child, was the proof that everything I'd done, every risk I'd taken, had been worth it. The law had given me purpose once. But family gave me reason. And as I sat there under the quiet Atlanta sky, I realized something simple but true. Justice may start in a courtroom, but it lives in the hearts of those who keep it alive. He nodded. "I wouldn't be doing it if I hadn't seen what you did. You reminded me that the law's not about power. It's about people." I smiled, feeling my chest tighten with emotion. "You just made your old man proud." Sarah tugged my sleeve. "Can I work there too, Grandpa? I can draw the logo." We both laughed, and I hugged them close. That night, when the house was quiet again, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I took the folded newspaper from my pocket and set it on the table. The photo of Marcus in cuffs stared up at me, a reminder that sometimes justice takes its time, but it never forgets. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of years ease off my shoulders. Maybe I wasn't the Lion of Atlanta. Maybe I was just Leonard Williams, a father, a grandfather, and a man who finally learned that truth, no matter how long it sleeps, will always rise when called by love. And as the night wind rustled through the trees outside, I whispered to myself, justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who never stop believing in it. Months slipped by quietly, each one softer than the last. The tension that had once filled our home was gone, replaced by the gentle rhythm of everyday life, the kind that makes you forget how heavy silence used to be. Sarah grew taller, sharper, funnier. She'd run out to the garden every morning to water the plants with her tiny pink watering can, singing songs she made up on the spot. The orange tree in the backyard, the one that had watched every battle we'd fought, was now heavy with fruit again. Sometimes I'd sit under it, coffee in hand, and watch her run barefoot through the grass. That sight alone was worth every sleepless night, every courtroom fight, every scar left behind. Malcolm had come a long way too. He was walking more steadily now, sometimes without his crutch. The doctor said it was the combination of therapy, persistence, and something they couldn't measure, determination. He had also started his small legal practice, just like he'd promised. He set up in an old brick building near Auburn Avenue, with a hand-painted sign that read Williams and Hope Legal Services. The first time I saw that sign, I felt something rise in my chest. Pride, the kind that makes your throat ache. I still remember the first client who walked in, an elderly woman who'd been cheated out of her pension by a crooked landlord. Malcolm handled her case personally, pro bono. When she won, she cried in his office, hugging him like he was her own son. Guess the Williams men still got a little fight left, he told me that evening, grinning. We celebrated with takeout and laughter, simple things that now felt sacred. Jasmine hadn't resurfaced. Not a call, not a letter, not even a rumor. The last I heard, through Robert, who still had connections, she'd left the city entirely. Some said she'd moved to Houston. Others whispered she was trying to rebuild her life under another name. Part of me wanted to hate her forever, but hate's a heavy coat to wear when you're trying to walk toward peace. So one evening, under the quiet of the orange tree, I decided to let go. I whispered into the dusk, "Wherever you are, I hope you find yourself and learn what love really means." It wasn't forgiveness. It was release. Because forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from poisoning your future. Every Sunday, Sarah and I had a ritual. We'd walk to the park by the church and feed the ducks. She'd bring her little notebook to draw the world around her, trees, clouds, people passing by. One morning, she looked up at me and asked, "Grandpa, are you going to be a lawyer again?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart. I think my time for that is done." "Why?" she asked, tilting her head. I looked out at the pond, where the sunlight danced on the water. "Because I already won the most important case of my life." She grinned. "The one with Daddy?" "That's right," I said. "The one where truth won." She nodded, scribbling something in her notebook. Later that day, I peeked at her drawing. It was a picture of me standing in a courtroom, holding her hand. Above it, she'd written in big, wobbly letters, "My grandpa fights for love." I don't think I've ever cried so quietly in my life. By summer, Malcolm's small firm had become a local beacon for folks who couldn't afford big lawyers. His phone rang constantly. Students, single mothers, retirees, they all came looking for help, and he never turned them away. Sometimes he'd call me into the office for advice. I'd sit in the back with a cup of coffee, watching him work, seeing myself in him. The same focus, the same spark. Only this time, his law came wrapped in empathy instead of ambition. One afternoon, a young woman came in holding a stack of eviction notices. Malcolm listened to her story with patience, nodding, asking questions, taking notes. When she left, he turned to me and said, "You know what's crazy, Dad? I used to think being a lawyer was about power. Now I realize it's about protecting the powerless." I nodded. "That's when you become a real one." He smiled softly. "Guess I learned from the best." As the days grew longer, life found a comfortable rhythm. There were cookouts on the weekends, neighbors dropping by with homemade pies, laughter spilling through open windows. Sarah started taking piano lessons, and every evening, the house filled with the clumsy beauty of her learning. The same hands that once trembled with fear now danced across the keys. Sometimes, when she'd miss a note and frown, Malcolm would chuckle. "You know, baby girl, music's a lot like life. It's not about playing it perfect. It's about not stopping when you hit the wrong key." She'd smile and try again, determination shining in her eyes. Watching them together filled me with a peace I hadn't known since before the accident. The storm had passed, and the light that followed was brighter than I'd ever expected. One late August afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, I sat on the porch with Robert. He'd stopped by on his way back from a case in Macon, still wearing that same old jacket and grin. "So," he said, lighting a cigarette, "retirement looks good on you." I laughed. "It looks better when you finally earn it." He took a drag and exhaled. "You ever think about writing it all down? The whole story? You've got enough in you for a book." I shook my head. "Nah, I think some stories are meant to stay in the hearts of those who live them." Robert smiled. "You're too modest. But hey, maybe Sarah will write it one day." I glanced toward the window, where Sarah sat drawing by the piano. "Maybe she will," I said quietly. He nodded. "You know, Leo, I've seen a lot of endings in my time. Messy ones, bitter ones. But this right here? This is the kind that gives a man peace." I smiled. "Peace is earned, Robert, and sometimes you have to fight hell itself to get there." He raised his coffee cup. "To peace, then." "To truth," I added. We clinked our cups and sat there watching the sunset until the first stars came out. That night, after everyone went to bed, I found myself in the study, looking through an old photo album. There were pictures of Malcolm as a boy, missing teeth, wild curls, eyes full of mischief. Pictures of my late wife, Evelyn, smiling by the church steps. Our wedding day, our first home, all the moments that made a life. I stopped at one photo of Malcolm holding newborn Sarah in his arms, tears on his cheeks. I remembered how proud he'd been, how sure he was that love could fix anything. And I realized he'd been right. It just took us a while to prove it. I closed the album and whispered, "We made it, Eve. We really did." Before heading to bed, I walked out onto the porch one last time. The night air was warm, crickets singing in the grass. The orange tree rustled softly in the breeze. I thought of everything that had happened. The courtroom, the pain, the betrayal, the redemption. It all felt like another lifetime now. Sometimes I wondered what people would remember about me after I was gone. Would they think of me as a lawyer, a fighter, the old man who took on the system one last time? I hoped they'd remember something simpler, that I was a man who loved fiercely, who believed that truth was worth every scar it left behind. The moon hung low over the city, glowing silver through the branches. I took a deep breath, the scent of orange blossoms filling my lungs, and whispered to the quiet night, "Justice doesn't end in court. It lives in every act of love that refuses to surrender." Then I smiled, because for the first time in my long, storm-worn life, I truly felt free. Autumn came slowly that year. The air in Atlanta turned crisp, carrying the smell of roasted peanuts and fallen leaves. The streets glowed gold under the maples that lined our block, and for the first time in years, I found myself walking just to enjoy the quiet. The world had gone still, not empty, but full of peace. One Saturday morning, I woke before dawn. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside. The porch boards creaked under my feet, the same familiar sound that had kept me company through many sleepless nights. I sat in my usual chair, wrapped in a light jacket, and looked out at the orange tree. Its branches were thinning now, a few stubborn fruits clinging to the cold air. The sky above it was painted pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that makes you think maybe the world still believes in forgiveness. As I watched the first rays of light stretch across the yard, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The battles, the loss, the courtroom, the moment justice finally found its way home. And through it all, the one constant had been love. Love for my son, who had fallen but stood again. Love for my granddaughter, who carried light into every dark corner. Love for a truth that refused to die. Later that morning, Sarah padded into the kitchen, her hair a wild mess, wearing her favorite fuzzy slippers. "Morning, Grandpa," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, sweetheart." She sat at the table, chin in her hands. "Daddy says we're going to the farmer's market today. Can you come too?" I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Malcolm came in a few minutes later, dressed in his work clothes, his tie slightly crooked. He was still juggling running his small practice and spending time with Sarah. But he was happy, truly happy. "You sure you want to tag along, old man?" he teased. "It gets crowded out there." I raised an eyebrow. "Son, I fought entire courtrooms full of liars. I think I can handle a few vegetables. Sarah giggled. Grandpa's funny. Grandpa's dangerous, Malcolm said, laughing. And for a moment, the kitchen was filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of cinnamon toast, the sound of a home healed. At the market, people waved when they saw us. Some recognized me from the news months back. Others just knew us as that family that had been through the storm and come out whole. A woman selling flowers handed Sarah a bouquet of daisies. For the little girl who told the truth, she said with a smile. Sarah's eyes widened. Thank you. I watched her beam, and my throat tightened. That little girl had more courage in her 8 years than many adults I'd known in 70. Malcolm loaded bags of fruit and vegetables into the car. When we were done, we sat at a small table by the fountain, sipping sweet tea. He leaned back, watching Sarah chase pigeons across the square. You ever think about Mom? He asked quietly. I nodded. Every day. Do you hate her for leaving? I took a slow breath. No, I used to. But hating her never gave me peace. Loving what she left behind did. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. I think that's what I'm finally learning too. We sat there in silence for a while, the sound of children laughing filling the air, the scent of roasted peanuts drifting over the square. Sometimes peace doesn't roar. Sometimes it just hums softly in the background, reminding you that you survived. That evening, we hosted a small neighborhood dinner on the porch. Old friends came by, including Robert, who brought a pie that looked like it had been through a war, but smelled heavenly. Still don't know how to bake, huh? I teased. He grinned. Still don't know how to retire, huh? We laughed, clinking coffee cups. The air was cool, filled with the low murmur of conversation and the soft music Sarah was playing inside on her piano. The notes drifted through the open window, a little uneven, a little unsure, but beautiful all the same. Malcolm stood by the railing, talking with Miss Thelma from next door. She was telling him about a group of local youth she worked with, kids who'd lost faith in the system, kids who needed guidance. When she left, he turned to me and said, Dad, I think I'm going to start a mentorship program for kids who want to learn about the law. You know, give them something to believe in. I felt my heart swell. That's a good idea, son. He smiled faintly. I think it's what you would have done. I shook my head. No, it's what you're meant to do. He nodded, looking thoughtful. Maybe you could come help sometimes. Tell them about your cases. I chuckled. If you can handle the old man stealing the spotlight. Malcolm grinned. That's the plan. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I stepped back onto the porch. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like diamonds. The orange tree rustled softly, and for a moment, I imagined Evelyn sitting beside me, her hand on mine. I could almost hear her voice, gentle and amused. You always did have to learn things the hard way, Leonard. I smiled. Yeah, I whispered, but I learned them. The door creaked open behind me, and Sarah stepped out, wearing her little nightgown, holding her stuffed bear. Grandpa, hey there, sweetheart. What are you doing up? I couldn't sleep, she said, climbing into my lap. Can you tell me a story? I wrapped my arm around her. What kind of story? One where everything ends happy, she said sleepily. I smiled, stroking her hair. Well, once upon a time, there was a man who lost everything, but then he realized what really mattered had been beside him all along. She yawned. And what was that? Love, I said softly. The kind that never gives up, no matter how bad things get. Her breathing slowed, and soon she was asleep against my chest. I held her close, feeling her heartbeat, steady, strong, full of promise. I looked out at the stars again, my eyes misting over. For so long, I thought justice was something that happened in courtrooms, verdicts, laws, arguments. But sitting there, with Sarah sleeping in my arms, I finally understood the truth. Justice is love made visible. It's what happens when we choose compassion over pride, truth over comfort, and family over everything else. As the night deepened, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for more years, but for gratitude, for the life I'd been given, for the people I'd fought for the chance to see the light return after the darkest storm. The old clock inside chimed midnight. I smiled. The sound no longer felt like a reminder of time slipping away. It felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. I stood slowly, carried Sarah inside, and tucked her into bed. She murmured something in her sleep. "I love you, Grandpa." "I love you too, baby girl," I whispered, kissing her forehead. Then I turned off the lamp, letting the house rest. Before heading to my room, I paused by the front door and looked out one last time. The moonlight washed the porch in silver, the orange tree swaying gently in the breeze. For the first time in my life, everything was still. Not because the world had stopped fighting, but because I had finally made peace with it. And as I closed the door behind me, I smiled and thought, justice doesn't fade with age. It just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes the sound of a child's laughter. Sometimes it's the warmth of family at the end of a long day. And sometimes it's just knowing you did right, even when it cost you everything. That was my legacy. Not the cases I'd won, not the title folks gave me, but the love I protected, the truth I refused to let die, and the family that would carry both forward long after I was gone.